In Ravenbrook, Pennsylvania, old women were part of the scenery like cracked sidewalks and dying trees. Eleanor Blackwood was one of them. At 72, she moved slowly, spoke little, and kept her eyes low. Neighbors assumed her life was already over. They were wrong. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. 20 years earlier, Eleanor had been sharp, respected, and successful. Her publishing company had started from nothing and grown into something powerful. Then came betrayal. Richard Hale, Margaret Hale, and Thomas Reed took everything using forged documents, false witnesses, and lies dressed as truth. Eleanor lost her company. Her husband died under stress. Her son vanished, ashamed of the scandal. What remained was an old woman the world labeled guilty. Eleanor didn't fight back immediately. She survived. She cleaned offices, shelved books at the library, ate cheap meals, slept with memories instead of comfort. Every insult hardened her. Every lonely night sharpened her mind. She promised herself one thing: if justice won't come to me, I'll walk to it myself. Eleanor turned libraries into weapons. Logbooks, financial crime cases, corporate fraud studies. She learned slowly but thoroughly. Technology terrified her at first. But fear didn't stop her anymore. She practiced. Failed. Tried again. Old age made her invisible. And invisibility gave her access. She watched her enemies from afar. Richard Hale wealthy, confident, untouchable. Margaret Hale praised for charity and kindness. Thomas Reed a legal star admired by courts. They laughed. They celebrated. They believed Eleanor was buried. But Eleanor was awake. Thomas Reed was careless. Eleanor noticed tiny inconsistencies in old case files, dates that didn't match, signatures that shifted. She compiled everything. Sent it anonymously. At first, nothing happened. Then came audits. Then hearings. Then silence. Thomas Reed lost his license. Eleanor marked her notebook, one down. Hale. Margaret Hale built her image on generosity. But Eleanor followed the money. Shell accounts. Fake donations. Tax fraud hidden behind smiles. Journalists received files from unknown sources. The headlines destroyed Margaret's image overnight. Charity boards resigned. Friends disappeared. Eleanor watched calmly. "Good people don't need masks," she whispered. Richard felt the walls closing in. For the first time in decades, fear touched him. He made mistakes, angry calls, secret meetings, rushed decisions. Eleanor recorded everything. The predator had become the prey. A new investigation reopened Eleanor's old case. This time, she was invited, not accused. Young lawyers listened carefully as Eleanor laid out her evidence, calmly and clearly. They realized something chilling: she had waited 20 years for this moment. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. Eleanor stood where she once begged for mercy. Now she spoke with authority. Richard avoided her eyes. Every document she presented tightened the noose. Truth doesn't rush. But it always arrives. The judge read the decision. Guilty on all charges. Richard Hale collapsed into his chair. The man who destroyed Eleanor's life was finally stripped of power. She didn't smile. She breathed. News outlets called Eleanor a hero. Some called her a survivor. Some called her dangerous. She didn't care. She declined interviews. She declined attention. Revenge was never about fame. It was about balance. Eleanor wrote one final letter to her son. Not begging. Not accusing. Just truth. She never knew if he read it. But writing it freed her. With compensation money, Eleanor opened a small community library. A quiet place. A safe place. She hired women who had been ignored, broken, underestimated. She gave them work and dignity. Weak. One evening, Eleanor sat on a park bench, feeding birds. A young woman asked, "Were you ever afraid?" Eleanor smiled softly. "Every day. But fear is not weakness. Giving up is." As the sun set, Eleanor Blackwood, once invisible, finally rested. Not as a victim, but as a warning: never underestimate an old woman with patience and memory. Justice came with a cost. Even after winning the case, Eleanor felt the weight of the past pressing on her chest. Nightmares returned: courtrooms, shouting voices, her husband collapsing on the floor. Revenge had healed the wound, but scars don't disappear. She understood something painful: winning a war doesn't mean you forget the battlefield. Ravenbrook changed its tone. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid her now nodded politely. Some apologized. Some avoided her out of guilt. Eleanor accepted none of it personally. Their opinions had never saved her before. Why should they matter now? One afternoon, Eleanor visited her old house. Someone else lived there now. New paint. New flowers. She stood across the street for a long time. She didn't cry. That house belonged to a woman she used to be. And that woman had already survived the worst. Prison-aged Richard Hale faster than time ever could. Powerless. Forgotten. Surrounded by silence. One night, he finally understood: Eleanor hadn't destroyed him with anger. She destroyed him with patience. And patience is something monsters never expect. Margaret Hale tried to write Eleanor a letter. She tore it apart. Some apologies come too late to matter. Some damage cannot be softened with words. Eleanor never asked for forgiveness. She asked for truth. At Eleanor's small library, women started gathering. Divorced. Fired. Accused. Ignored. They saw themselves in her story. Eleanor didn't give speeches. She listened. Sometimes, listening saves lives more than advice. Eleanor began teaching evening classes: basic law knowledge, financial awareness, digital safety. Not revenge. Protection. Power, she told them, is knowing how the system works before it works against you. One rainy evening, a man stood outside the library. Tired eyes. Familiar face. Her son. He didn't speak at first, neither did she. Some wounds need silence before words. They talked for hours. About shame. About fear. About lies that destroyed families. There were no accusations. Just honesty. He hugged her before leaving. That hug healed something revenge never could. Blackwood. Years later, Eleanor passed quietly in her sleep. No headlines. No drama. But her library remained. Her students remained. Her story remained. In Ravenbrook, people told young girls, if the world tries to erase you, remember Eleanor Blackwood. She was never loud. Never cruel. Yet she became unforgettable.